Welcome to the keynote from Cornell. I'm your host, Lutz Finger. I'm a faculty member at the Johnson School where I teach several courses on AI, including one actually where I replace myself with an AI virtual bot. I have as well a certificate program which is open to the public. It's called Designing and Building AI Solutions, or as Marc Andreessen would call it, it's time to build. That's the main focus of the course. Well, beyond academia, I'm a startup founder and a CEO from a Gen AI platform for e-commerce where we're transforming how shoppers engage with websites, search, filters, and products. And I went there because AI and Gen AI is actually transforming many industries. And it will still transform many industries, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to figure out what is hype, what is value. And therefore, it is a special honor for me today to welcome Martin Casado, with whom we will discuss what's actually working. Martin doesn't need really an introduction. He's a well-known name in Silicon Valley and beyond. He is a pioneer in software-defined networking. He's like me, a physicist. He is now a general partner at A16Z or Andreessen Horowitz, one of the best venture capital company out there. And he has backed some of the most exciting startups at the moment in this AI phase. So let's talk about what is working. Let's cut through the hype and let's see where we are heading. Martin, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Before we go into the what's working, can you just give me a little bit like a background to our audience about yourself? You're European, but you grew up in Montana and you ended up in Silicon Valley.
I'm a fake European. Also, no, it's true. It's funny. Because my mom calls me Martin, so my name is Martin. I was born in Spain. However, I actually grew up in a dirt road in Montana. So actually all my aesthetic is like Nintendo generation nerd country boy. But yeah, so the quick sketch is, I actually grew up in rural towns in the West in the US. I did my undergrad. I'm actually a failed, physicist. So in physics, you can be really good at math or you can be really good at computers. I tend to be better at computers than math. And so I ended up going into computation. That actually went to, my first job was at a national lab, computational physics. I was actually at the national lab when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And so I was actually, at the time I was in a weapons program, doing simulations. And the kind of the tenor of the nation changed, right? At the time, it was kind of almost this holdover from the Cold War, but I had the clearances, so they moved me to intelligence. And intelligence, what's important, of course, is more cybersecurity, networking systems. And so I didn't know anything about it. So I actually took a course at Stanford to learn networking. And I was just this random guy that just kind of showed up. But from there, I actually got into the PhD program. That's how I got into systems. Funny enough, I was actually going to be a professor at Cornell. So when I finished my PhD, yeah. So I had an offer at Cornell, but instead I decided to do this startup at a terrible time, which was the bottom of the recession. A16Z invested. Ben Horowitz is on my board. And then we were kind of their first Series A to $1 billion exit. We were kind of their first kind of big exit. I ran that business for quite a while, and then I joined as a general partner. So I've kind of done all the walks, academic, founder, investor.
That's pretty cool.
Failed physicist.
Failed physicist, a successful founder, and pretty successful GP at a venture fund. Now, why would you maybe just give it a little bit of thought process? Because when you are trading companies, when you're managing people, when you go from zero to what was it, 1.2 billion or so, which
that was the exit, yeah.
What's the thought process? Why did you join then? People say the other side, the venture capital side.
I just view listen, I legitimately love computer science. I legitimately love innovation. I legitimately love software. Like I legitimately love it, right? And there's many times in my career, like when I'm super stressed, like when my company is failing, or like when I'm an executive at a big company, or like I'm gonna go like be an actor, which I'd be terrible at because I know nothing about acting. But like you have these moments where you're so stressed, you want to go do something else. But when the stress goes away, and I'm like, just like spending time, whatever, like what I'm interested in is computers. I think they're just amazing. I think that it really is like this kind of meta language to solving all problems. And so then I view my career as almost moving up in Zoom level, right? In my 20s. So I'm 48 right now. So in my 20s, it was like, my Zoom level, the thing I was focused on was like an individual paper, an individual line of code. I was a software programmer. Maybe an individual project. And then in my, at 30, I literally walked from my dissertation to start the company. I started to view the world more like the abstraction of, I zoomed out a bit and I thought of that as products and markets and people, but for one area, for like one market, one organization, one product portfolio. And that brought me to my 40s. And then in my 40s, I zoomed up one more level. And now the primitive that I'm working with is companies, right? And you get to see it play out in the experiment manyfold in many different ways, and you learn a lot more by doing that. And so, I mean, it's true passion actually for innovation and for computer science and for startups, why that I just continue to do it. And I do think the different perspectives as you kind of evolve in your career are incredibly helpful for you to understand how all of this stuff comes together.
Amazing. Now let's do that zooming out for a second, because if we are talking about what's working, and I met you a while back. Well, I actually met you in a wedding, but like I met you for real.
You don't remember? I remember that. Yeah.
No, sorry, but the real Martin, and like your thought process, I actually met in a chat group which was called Yet Another Infra Group. And we discussed a lot of hype and what's working on. And so let's zoom out. Can you, in the prep, you talked about this is the biggest shift we have seen since the internet. Just give a little bit like contextual ideas here.
So maybe it's worth first talking about why AI hasn't worked. So here's the thing. I mean, AI has like steadily progressed since the 60s, right? And we've like solved all sorts of amazing things, right? Like, in the 90s, we could beat like Russians at chess. We've been very good at like perception for a long time. We've had self-driving cars for a long time. Like listen, when I joined Stanford for my PhD, it was in 2003, and Sebastian Thrun had just won the DARPA Grand Challenge. And I remember that because everybody was like, hooray, self-driving cars are here, And so, it's been around for a very long time, but then if you look at the industry, it's invested $100 billion since then. And finally, we're actually there. So there's been this very open question of like...
Actually, we should hold on. This is so telling. Finally, we are there. In San Francisco, we have self-driving cars. In the rest of the world,
San Francisco. No, 100%. And even then, like the technology is finally there, like not even a mass deployment. And so I think that's a great microcosm for the story of AI, which is basically, it's been very, very capable, but we've never had AI native businesses. We've never had AI native startups that have really been successful in a wave. And the reason is the economics have just not been there, right? The economics have been terrible. They require tons of capital investments. There's perverse economies of scale anywhere. And so it's like, it's been a great technology, but it's been a terrible business, right? That's it. That's literally the story of the last 30 years.
Can we just when you say AI native business, and I have this discussion quite often about, like if you look at LinkedIn, it's a social network. Yes, it uses AI to figure out who to connect to, but it's not an AI native business, right? If you look at many other, and it has a lot of AI, but if you look at Netflix, it uses AI to suggest the movie, but in reality, it's a channel for or like videos, right? So how do you define AI native business? And what did you say when you say it hasn't been a success? Well, I did my whole career in there. So, but what do you mean?
Right. So I'm talking about AI starting 5 years and before that. Like, it's historically not been a fertile ground for startups. right? And by AI native, I mean the primary product offering or value is driven by AI. As opposed to, I mean, listen, Netflix is sent DVD. You didn't need AIs, right? Like LinkedIn was a social network. You didn't need AI. So of course, like AI will give you some sort of a lift and some sort of stickiness, but that was not actually at the heart of what was being built or what was being sold, nor was it at the heart of the people that you were hiring early on, et cetera. This includes Google, right? I mean, Google early on, this is a traditional index, search. It was not AI. And so again, just take it from the position of an investor. So an investor, you spend decades hearing about AI and seeing all of these great academic papers, and then startups come in and they show you these great examples, but you never have a wave like you had with mobile or like you had with cloud. You never had a wave of these kind of AI native companies. And the paradox has always been like, well, why is this the case? And we actually did a lot of studies of this. We actually, at Recent Horse, we studied. We're like, okay, so why did this never take off? And the answer is just the economics have never been there, right? What AI has historically done is if you have a business, it can improve it by 20%, which if you're Google, that's amazing. Or if you're LinkedIn, to your point, or Netflix, that's amazing. But if you're a startup, a 20% improvement in something does not a company make. So the big change that happened this time, and probably the most important thing of our entire talk, is the following, which is with the generative stuff, it actually has an economic dislocation that's very specific, which is, well, there's two of them, and the definitions get muddled, but I'm going to simplify it and we can kind of explain it later, which is it brings the marginal cost of creation to zero, and it brings the marginal cost of language reasoning to zero. So if you think about compute, so compute brought the marginal cost of computing two numbers to zero, right? So before we had compute, you literally, actually the name computer came from the term we gave people that were calculating logarithms by hand. And then we created ENIAC, which was a computer that could do it, 10,000 times faster. With the internet, we brought the marginal cost of distribution to zero, right? And so you could send it in mail, it'd take 2 weeks, or you can send it immediately over the internet, and the price per bit literally dropped to zero. And so with generative AI, the marginal cost of creation has gone to zero. And a lot of the many successful companies you see, this is what they provide. They provide the creation of image, they provide the creation of a story, they provide the creation. And the economic dislocation is incredibly clear, which is let me just give you one example and then I'll shut up and we'll go forward. But let's take me. Okay. So if I wanted 10 years ago to get an avatar of me to put on my my social profile, right? Let's say I wanted to be a Pixar character. Martina's a Pixar character. So to do that, I'd go to a designer, and the designer would spend, let's say, 2 hours at $100 an hour, so it costs $200. That's how I would get this, or I would do it poorly and look terrible. Today, I just use a model to do that, and the inference cost. So the actual cost to generate that image is about 1/100th of a penny. Actually, these days it's less. It's about 1/1000th of a penny, right? So you're talking about a 5-order magnitude difference in cost. That's an economic dislocation. These are the things that super cycles are made from.
Yep. And it's actually a nice term, super cycle, and we should get back to this. But I, just as an example, we have, so I created this online course, right? As I said early on. And in this online course, I replace myself with an AI. And the question was always, why would you do that? And the reason is that I don't have to fly or to travel to Ithaca to sit in a studio with our nice studio staff here. A quick shout out to them. That I can do this actually from my home, right? So I save cost and I become more effective and can keep the course up to date. Now, that said, why should people, and this is a little bit like the hype discussion. For me, it makes sense, right? For me is I replace myself, I don't have to travel. Awesome. But why should somebody actually create a virtual copy of themselves? For most people, this is a little bit of a weird thing, or the uncanny valley.
So I don't know the answer to that because I don't know that space very well. But what I can talk about is what people are doing. Right. So in the companies that are doing well, I think there's a lot of use cases. I don't want to be dismissive. There's a lot of use cases like the one that you just brought up that are just emerging because the technology is there. And I don't really know how to reason about them yet just because they're not in broad use. But the companies that are working today, think about 11 Labs or Midjourney or Ideogram, there's these existing companies today. You can ask a question okay, why are people using those companies? What do the products do? And in most cases, what they're doing is they're taking some content that for which there's market demand for, and they're basically driving the time and the cost of creating it to zero, right? Whether that's music, that's an image, that's speech. And you need these both in like consumer use cases, like it's entertainment. I like to listen to music. I like to whatever. Or there are enterprise use cases, like in the case of speech is a very important one. Like if I'm going to subtitle a movie, I need something to do that. So I can either go through kind of like this laborious process of having actors do it, or I can have a model do it, or a model work with an actor, which is very common. And so again, like the reason that this AI wave is so important and successful is you can very clearly articulate like what is the value, what is it relative to an existing market need. Code is another great one. We clearly need developers. Developers are a massive market, arguably $1 trillion market. If you think about like 100K for like 50 million developers, if you could speed up their productivity by 20%, you're talking about $200 billion, and that's just code. And we know there's so many verticals that are working. There's all the diffusion models, like I mentioned, which is image and video and music. There's code, but then all the language stuff, which I haven't even talked about, which is, think OpenAI ChatGPT, which is like search, retrieval, novel writing, whatever. And so there's this whole panoply of use cases where the economic equation is just totally, disrupted.
This is pretty amazing because I think you talked about the super cycle saying, okay, there is something new. This time it actually can be not an add-on like it was for Netflix or LinkedIn or for whatsoever. This time it can be actually an own business value. And then you talked about coding. Like you guys invested into a company called Cursor. If you just explain, this is pretty amazing. Explain why these guys are so cool and what this means.
So Cursor is the most popular development IDE. And what an IDE is, it's an integrated development environment. So any software developer, the primary tool they use is an IDE, right? And so that's kind of where they like write the code and it does things. So Cursor is the most popular AI version of that. So what it does is, one way to think about it is, if I'm a developer and I'm using the IDE, it will use AI as almost like this, companion or sidekick or coworker that you can chat with about your code base, that will help make edits to your code base, that will make suggestions. And it's just seen massive adoption. It may be one of the fastest growing companies in the history of the industry. I mean, so publicly it went from 0 to 100 million in 14 months. I mean, we just never see that in this. And so it's just a very exciting company, but it also shows that in these super cycles, and we also saw this with the internet again, like if you have a disruptive technology, they take off very quickly just because you have an existing market and an existing need that's being filled by, a real technology innovation.
Yes, awesome. Let me do a quick public service announcement here. If you are out there and listening to us and you kind of think like, Cursor, what's about this, what's about that, ask us. You have in your live stream the ability to ask us questions. I see that I got already a few. So submit them in the chat. I will see them live and I will bring them in as we talk and as I see fit. And we can, if we don't get to everybody, which we most likely won't, then we can answer them afterwards. So this is your chance to talk to Martin and me kind of live in an asynchronous way. Now, let's come back to the topic, because what you just said is, you pointed to something that you said there is an existing need. And I use, by the way, for my own course, I use those no coding tools, because what I figured out is my course gets typical MBAs or business people, and I'm trying to help them build stuff. So I give them background of technology, and I give them all those tools in this certificate program. So we developed our own Copilot and like Cursor-like style, only a little bit more simpler for people who don't really understand code. And you see how they write code on the side. Pretty nice. But you pointed to one thing here. You said, hey, it has to help with a certain need. And because the need was there and suddenly the technology comes out, you as a VC, you see many people who probably come up with a hammer looking for a nail, where the fundamentals are not there. Can you talk through this a little?
Yeah, so yeah, this is also a very complicated topic. So either
That's the reason why I'm
listen,
asking.
no, it's a great, and it's a very important topic, and there's so little that's actually like written about it that's sensible. I'm just trying to figure out like what's the right way for me to like. Many of the most successful high growth companies you've seen are actually in existing markets. Like Google was third generation search, famously. Like Facebook was third generation social networking. Actually, Cursor, when it showed up, there was a previous product from Microsoft called Copilot that you probably heard of, you know. And so, there's always this kind of misunderstanding of markets that if that all these companies that showed up and were successful were like this new breakout innovation. That's almost never the case. In almost every case, like something else has matured the market, the user behavior was there, the buying behavior was there, and then you just managed to like hit the right timing or the right product form factor, whatever, to take advantage of it. And that literally is the history of the tech industry, independent of what people say on category creation, et cetera. Like that's just the reality. And we see it all the time, right? There's these great, and it's not even like a hammer searching for a nail. It's like either the market exists or it doesn't. And if it doesn't exist, you have to create the market, right? And so there's an entirely separate motion, which is, some people call it category creation. I call it market annealing, whatever it is, where you do have something innovative. People may not even have a problem yet, but you want to go solve that problem that they may not have, right? And this is actually the journey that I did with my company, which is like we created this technology that nobody knew they needed or wanted. And I see this all the time. And that doesn't mean you can't build a great company. It's just like it's much harder. You're chewing glass. You're going to people and saying, "No, I promise you have a problem, even though you don't know you have a problem. And here's the solution, even though you don't even think you have a problem to begin with." It takes much longer. It's much harder. You build companies very differently if you're going after category creation. And so the way that if I were, if I were listeners here and thinking about doing startups or investing in startups, et cetera, I would split the world in two ways. There's existing markets with existing user behavior, with existing budgets, and companies that go over those are going to have more competitive pressure. Execution is going to matter more, but they will grow much faster. And there, if you get timing right, you get the great growth. There's the other one, which is you really have this crazy innovation, but the market doesn't exist. And you can get iconic companies that way, but it's just hard. It's just hard, and it's a very different founder. It's a very different journey.
It's like, and like this is amazing. If you take those two approaches, you say existing problem, AI makes it better, and because AI makes it better, you have actually a chance of value creation. And then we have AI and we can do a value creation that we could have not done before.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
there's one question from from the audience, which like Thomas Ward actually asked, how do you see the difference between single use case and multiple use case? So single use case like a Midjourney, focusing on one area, while OpenAI just goes broad and trying to address many different topics. Is like both of them actually fall into the space of something completely new?
Well, this is a very interesting question. It's actually a great question, very interesting question, because if you actually look at OpenAI, to what extent have they actually gone broad? Like they were actually, it's very interesting that you brought up Midjourney. So OpenAI was basically the first with text to image, right? With DALL-E, and so like, but where is it with DALL-E? Nowhere, right? And so Midjourney took it. OpenAI was clearly the first with code, right? So with like Copilot, whatever, but like Anthropic seems to be the leader in code. I mean, OpenAI was the best, I would say, production quality with video with Sora, and yet, like that market has kind of gone to others. And so, the story of startups, independent of this, is choose a very large single market and go win that because it's just too hard to walk and chew gum. But there's also this kind of natural law of physics and company, which is if you have something that's working and it's a large market, why would you ever not prioritize the next line of code or the next sales motion into that? And so I think that the story right now of AI in general, this generative AI, is these are incredibly large markets. Like the market is growing incredibly fast, so we're just seeing more fragmentation. Right? It's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, like it's almost like every company is kind of finding its niche, and this only happens when the market is expanding, right? That's when it fragments. And so I would say right now, focus is important, and even if you don't do it, the market's naturally going to do it for you, and and all of these things are sufficiently horizontal that there's kind of a lot going on. But then when the market slows down, you will see consolidation, and then you do have to start thinking about product portfolios and multiple areas and all of that stuff.
It's actually like fascinating, right? Ben Evans, the analyst, he at one point in time worked for Andreessen Horowitz actually.
Honestly, Benedict is one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. He is funny. So if as a shout out to him, we have no association. I mean, he kind of moved on and he did a phenomenal job at Andreessen Horowitz. But if you can read his newsletter, I mean, he is one of the smartest analysts on the face of the planet. He is phenomenal.
He is phenomenal, and he is really like his newsletter is easy to read. I recommend him as well to all my students. Yeah, and he lately said, OpenAI seems like a premature product. It actually has not a good interface. And you alluded to this between OpenAI can code for me, right? But I need the IDE integration in order to make Cursor to make this a useful product. Can you maybe talk about feature versus
there's another way to view that, which is what OpenAI is good at is actually natural language chat, and the products it's very strong at are natural language chat, and the use cases of natural language chat like retrieval, question and answer, search, and research. Right, that's kind of what's really working. And
he showed that research is actually not their strong part in his latest post, but yes.
Yeah. But these are the ones that people are using, and I use deep research a lot, and I find value out of it. And so you're just saying like that's actually what they're good at. When it comes to code, Anthropic just did better, and so and that's become their focus, and they're very good at code. And there's a lot of value at the model level. But there's also in order to bring these more broadly, there is value at the app level. And this has always been the case with infrastructure, right? Like clearly there's value in computers, clearly there's value in operating systems, and clearly there's value in apps. And we're seeing the same thing play out here.
Absolutely. Yes. Perfect. Now, if you let's move on. There is another if we move on from Cursor, there's another hype which is going on, and you triggered this as we talk about research, because one of the Sam Altman says we know that how to build AGI, and I publicly said several times I don't think so, but the whole point here is that we do this iterative loop. We have an AI, and that spits out the most common next thing. Life is like the box of chocolate. So yes, and then we critique ourselves. Maybe there are other ways what life could be like. And then we kind of make a list and then we follow through. This iterative loop became something which we call then deep research or whatsoever. And it became the basis for agents. Now, Anthropic did a lot of Copilot, or Copilot as the brand name came from Microsoft. And now we do this critiquing and following through, and this becomes agents. Can you talk a little bit about, is this a different category? Is this just an improvement of something? In which of your world does this fall?
Yeah, so I think agent is one of the most diluted terms, almost to the point of being useless. But there's actually three working definitions.
So is AGI by now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's misdefined. Yeah. So I mean, just to give everybody listening kind of context. So my team, I run the infrastructure fund. It's $1 billion fund. I have a team of, let's call it 12 people. Very kind of, many PhDs, many founders, real smart team. My team sees about 3,000 deals a year, something like that, of which we spend pretty serious time with probably 500, of which we do really, really, really deep work on about 50. It's a very real funnel. So we just kind of have this kind of broad view. And I think I only say all of that to say the most confusing thing right now is this term agents, because it doesn't really mean the same thing to the same people. In the same meeting, you'll see two people talking and they have two different ideas in their head about what agent means. And so they can't communicate. So let me just give you the three definitions that I see most commonly. Definition number one is an actual agent representation that someone talks to. I'm a virtual agent and I'm going to help you with your support ticket. That's one definition of agent. And it's this very product anthropomorphized. I'm an AI agent. That's one.
And the
There's
value
another
creation,
term.
just because like let's put value creation next to it. For those, the value is it's an existing problem, and the agent does this existing problem half the way, full the way, and it's cheaper. So that's a value
That's
creation.
right. Yeah, yeah, and it's actually an agent. Like it's like I'm a sales agent. I'm a support agent. I'm
Yeah.
a so like that's one. There's a second one that's more of a technical definition, and it does hold water, which basically says you close the control loop with AI so that the output will become the input again, and you can do multiple iterations without the need from a human to be involved to solve higher level tasks, right? So if I say, go book me a ticket, there's many steps that are involved. And so it can do this by reasoning about what to do next, and then it will do multiple steps to do that. So that's one definition. By the way, those are kind of not working yet because the tech isn't quite there. Like these LLMs are very unpredictable. It's very hard to kind of nudge them in a way that you can actually get predictability for complex tests. And then the third definition of agent, which is probably the most confusing, is if you've heard of like MCP, like like the model context protocol, and like agentic this and agentic that, and tool use and whatever. That's kind of generally used for any time an LLM calls out into a tool. Like I'm gonna like send an email or I'm gonna do this, and so like they call this agentic, but it's not really the formal one. It just means anytime they do a tool. So I will say like the term itself is almost useless, but like the things it's talking about are very real, and they're very real trends.
Yes, I love this. By the way, this call out thing. If you would take that the description, then the fact that ChatGPT 4 actually could do math questions, that was the first agentic callout because it actually uses a calculator, right? Instead
Yeah,
of
exactly,
trying to,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and then for that was not saying agent in the sense of like the closing control loop. It just it could actually go out and
yeah.
it had some agency when talking to something else, basically.
Now we have two questions which I actually want to funnel here because
Yeah.
we have Jasmine and Rocky Russell, and both kind of saying, okay, when we are a non-AI company, we hear that agents are like our big savior, right? Like because we can improve workflows, we can put them in. And similar to the cursor discussion, we had a workflow and we had a model. Anthropic, by the way, I mean, yes, Anthropic is better in writing code, but Cursor got all the fame because it was integrated into a workflow. What is your advice to enterprise transformation enterprise companies if they say, oh, I see all of the things happen, and Martin tells me that there's a huge shift, but I have my workflow, so I don't know how to participate in this huge shift.
I mean, this is the CEO-ish of all CEO-ish questions, right? Like if a VC is trying to answer that, then you're in trouble. I will say one thing. Listen, I sit on a lot of boards. I'm on like what 24 boards or something like that, and like guaranteed some VC on the board is going to be like, add AI. We need more AI, right? Like without actually understanding like the market. Like this is the most founder centric question that ever exists, which is you're in a space, the space is being disrupted. What do you do? And the first question you have to ask yourself is like, are you really being disrupted? Because the VC has no clue, right, on your board if you're being disrupted or not. There's plenty of companies that are doing great that are adjacent and are drafted on AI and they don't add any AI. There's plenty of those. So you first ask that question. The second one is if you are being disruptive, then you need to basically redo the product journey again. So I view all companies go through three phases. There's the product phase, the sales phase, and the operations phase. You can't skip phases, and sometimes you have to go back to the beginning. And listen, I mean, we've seen that we've got great class examples of this. Netflix is probably the best ever. I mean, from DVDs to total self-disruption to streaming, like total self-cannibalization, and then to content creation. Again, like basically cannibalization. You had to totally transform the business. And so I think this is the one where like the product founders, the product CEOs, the product people in the company, they sit down, they ask really serious questions, and then they make a decision on whether there's an impact or not. But what it's not is like you kind of sprinkle AI and you're done. It's not that. I mean, this is like the most serious of questions you can ever have. And it drives me nuts when I sit in these board meetings and the VC is like, add AI. It just drives me nuts because it's not actionable and it's often just not even true.
Yep, yep. And I like so for a while I was advising the Deutsche Bank, and this was so it was every week one day, every second week one day over in Frankfurt and talking to the CEO, and we had a lot of discussion about how to use data and AI, and it's not sprinkling completely, right? Because it comes down to the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And I think the big advice you give here, and which is really helpful, if you use AI, you should always ask yourself, how do I make either something better? Because you are in the existing product bucket. You have customers, you have a workflow. How do I make this better or how do I save costs? These are the two things you can do. That's like such as business.
Yeah, but I also think you should ask, am I being disrupted? Like you have to ask that hard question. And like if you're being disrupted, like adding AI doesn't help you. It requires sometimes these very fundamental changes to the company. And again, we have these very iconic studies of this. Like
Yes.
Netflix is my favorite because the cannibalization was so brutal and so complete. If you read the book, they're like the existing exec, like the old execs were so pernicious. The white blood cells were so dangerous that we literally had to kick them out of the room. Right.
Yes.
I mean, and again, it all depends on the nature. There is no answer to this question, and people want to reduce it to like a simple thing. So I love that this question came up because it is the most important question. Unfortunately, it's the one that like makes founders founders. Really.
Like it's so funny that you said like you're doomed if a VC needs to tell you that. I'm totally with you. You know, there's another question which a lot of I'm counting now here 3 people who asked me this, and if you just tuned in, ask questions, I will feed them into our conversation. But like, and you do this in the live stream. But one of the questions, like three people asked something like, "What can we do to not be obsolete? How do I know that I'm not being disrupted?" And I learned something from you, Martin, in our prep work. I should have known actually, but I learned it became actually clear once we talked. That you're saying, I'm not predicting the future. I'm predicting trends by looking at very good founders where they're going. Now, which industries like do you think are being disrupted at the moment where people should worry? Actually, they shouldn't worry. They should change companies.
I mean, this is like looking at a hurricane and trying to predict the path, which you kind of can, but you really can't. And locally, you definitely can't. Like you don't know what house it's going to stand and which is not going to
Yep.
stand. I mean, these are very complex, chaotic systems. Let me say a few things. Listen. I'm an old guy. I've been boots on the ground for major disruptions, like major, like PC to SaaS, like internet, like cloud, like mobile. Um, we almost never remove layers of the stack. We just add it. Like the TAM just gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller. And yes, like what is in demand, like grows, but it's always adjacent, right? So it's not like there's just going to be mass, shifts, at least in tech. In tech, it's still software. You'll still need software developers. You'll still need designers. Like I just think that this grows the TAM of tech. There are clearly areas outside of tech that will be impacted because of the nature of these models. Like, so for example, I've got 2 cousins, live in Berlin, and translators, pretty high-end translators, and they visited me recently. They're like, listen, we're looking for different jobs. And it's not because our jobs got removed, but like they want us to double check AI, and I don't want to do that because like I'd have to rewrite everything, and like it's this soulless work. And so I don't want to trivialize the impact to on the ground work. And I do think if you're in design areas, the world will change. And I think if you're in language areas, like the world will change a bit. And I do think that there is like a societal imperative to step in and help with that. And that happens everyone. It happens with the compute revolution. It happens, so I think that.
Photography made paintings different, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have artists anymore, right?
Right. We see it all the time. But I will say, I'm going to just answer, like, I'm not a sociologist. I'm going to answer strictly from the perspective of tech. I mean, From a perspective of tech, this is value accretive. It is TAM accretive. It'll be larger. I definitely think that you need to, like, if you're a founder or if you're running a company, you need to do like you do for any sort of disruption and understand the impact. And you need to navigate that. But just realize like the future is way brighter with this stuff than not. And that's for sure. By the way, the internet, people are even more scared of the internet. Like, oh, there's going to be one company and it's going to be Microsoft. And it'll have all of the apps. It'll have the entire web and blah, 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 blah. And like, none of it's true. And then nobody forgets how scared everybody was. Like, totally same vibes today.
I love that reference. Yes, pretty amazing. Now, we discussed workflows and like the value. We discussed those different, either improve something or create something new. We talked about the importance of fundamentals. There is one topic which you very often bring up when you talk publicly about startups. It's a little bit the go-to-market strategy that like having a cool idea in itself, as you said earlier, and it's like if you do a category, it's chewing glass. Like talk us a little bit through go-to-market strategy thoughts and maybe take a company from your portfolio.
Well, a very interesting thing that happens in these super cycles is the enterprise does not know how to consume them. And so, like a traditional infra company, B2B company, your life is dictated by sales, marketing and sales, right? Just because the enterprise is buyers and that's the majority of the money. And, and I spent my entire career basically cutting my teeth in enterprise, sales. But these super cycles are so different that the enterprise doesn't even know how to think about them, right? It was the same thing with the internet. I mean, people don't remember, like the PC was a consumer phenomenon. Like the smartphone, other than research in motion, was a consumer phenomenon. The browser, the internet was a consumer phenomenon. The reason it's a consumer phenomenon is not that it's not useful to business, is that business can't figure it out yet. Like early on, there were companies that banned the browser. Like Sun Microsystems famously banned the browser for a period of time, right? And so I would just say the meta point on this topic is if you look at many of the companies that are being very successful right now, they actually are these prosumer companies, or they focus on individuals. Like Cursor focuses on individual developers. Midjourney, consumers, even like ChatGPT is very much this consumer thing. And the reason is because you go to the enterprise and I don't know how to think about it. How do I operationalize this? What budget does it come out of? Who, whatever. It's very, very complicated to get them to think about it. As markets mature and as budgets get created and as organizations shift within large enterprise, then the most important thing is the sale, at least for B2B companies, is the sales cycles. And you really have to become a student of go-to-market. And so, probably the steepest learning curve I've ever had in my entire life, in my entire career, was nerdy, poorly dressed, PhD with a company that had to learn enterprise sales in Japan, right? I mean, it's this is so terribly different. And so it is a very, very core aspect. But in this stage of the super cycle right now, we're just not really there yet for many companies. Some companies are, but most companies are not.
Fascinating. Let me challenge this. I'm push back on it. So
please.
When I see the consumer behavior, yes, and I'm with you on Cursor, I'm with you on OpenAI, I'm with you on Midjourney. However, I would claim that in the broad application, this comes down to our agents, where you say, look, they are hallucinating. It's hard for them to keep track. It's hard, reasoning can get you anywhere. That it actually has to go through a confined space, a confined error space, or a confined area where you cannot go too much right or left, where you have a path. And that would be the enterprise. If I want to book, OpenAI, put on their website, oh, this is so cool, you can now book a trip to Japan. Really? No, you can't. Now, if you are somebody who is only booking trips, I can have an agent to actually check certain things which are in my workflow. Wouldn't that mean that enterprise adapts first?
Well, I mean, let's just go through the companies and the numbers. Name one top enterprise company right now in AI.
Mistral? Kind of, yeah. Yeah, I
No,
hear
I
you.
mean
I hear you.
this is open source software developery. I mean,
Yep,
clearly they're doing
yep.
some enterprise sales. I mean, I will say OpenAI, predominantly consumer, of course, enterprise is turning on now. 11 Labs, private consumer, of course, enterprise is turning on now. Ideogram, totally consumer. Like they are like Harvey, of course, sells to legal. So like if you're selling to like an existing motion budget buyer that's non-tech, maybe, right?
Yes.
Or something like Glean, which is enterprise search, which is an existing category, great product, maybe. But like these phenomena, these high growth phenomena you're seeing, a lot of them are. It's not that they're a consumer. Like these are used by professionals, like Ideogram, which is a text to image company. Like a lot of the users are designers, like legit professional designers in the profession, but like it's a credit card from an individual because there is no central buyer for this type of things. And so this is a natural evolution of these super cycles. The internet was exactly the same. There are, of course, exceptions. Absolutely, there are exceptions. And over time, the bulk always ends up in the enterprise. And that's the direction it's going, but we're not there yet.
Got it. Understood. Yes. And this is actually, I mean, I would, the idea of if you take Talk Harvey, like if you go the consumer route, that's probably the biggest price you can get. And yes, these are the big names. Harvey is, I would say, doing good business, right?
It's
By
great.
just
It's great. It's great. Yeah, yeah.
optimizing on one area.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah. Well, also, it's also a non-technical. I mean, I would definitely caveat what I'm saying for like non-technical use cases, like whatever, like debt recovery, legal, or existing buyer behavior,
yes.
existing product categories like enterprise search. Like Glean is doing great in enterprise search, right? Like, and whether it's AI or not, I mean, like it's doing a great job in enterprise search. But for these
Yes.
new behaviors, which is like the magical creation of stuff, like it. By the way, if you haven't read Chris Dixon's, the next new thing will start as a toy blog post, I think today still is the most prescient blog on organic adoption of new technology. And it basically says what nerdy hobbyists do on the weekend will always look like a toy, but that's what becomes the next new thing. And it always looks kind of weird, and it always is something that like starts with these kind of fringe groups. And it's very different than the kind of innovator's dilemma kind of like crossing the chasm view. It really is about these organic phenomenons, and we're witnessing an organic phenomenon up
Yeah.
close.
Now, give me a second to dig into Glean because
Yeah.
Graham Pearson talked in one question about the value of data in terms of,
Yeah.
and he called this outside in versus inside out, meaning trained with external data versus trained with internal data. And he listened to us, and like his question is, how do you value data assets? Because ChatGPT didn't come really up with ChatGPT 5. There is a kind of a capping out of what we understand of human language. Like, so where is data valued, and will that change the equation on enterprise versus consumer?
I mean, the marginal value of data is very little, right?
Yes.
And it always has been. It's never not been. I mean,
Actually,
I
let me
think
dig into like just to make it like the marginal value, just make sure that people understand this. If you
yeah,
want to get paid for a Facebook post, like one single
yeah.
Facebook post doesn't help the model to learn anything. This is one of millions data points, therefore it's the value is zero.
So I'll be more precise, which is once you've collected a lot of data, the next bit of data you get, the value of that converges on zero, which means that the leaders will always be moving slower than the challengers, which is a perverse economy of scale, right? It's the opposite of a network effect. So, what is a network effect? A network effect is if you actually have an interconnection of pairs, right? Like an actual network or a social network. The thing with a network effect is the number of connections grows super linearly with the number of endpoints, right? So, like the more you add, the more connections you have. And so the marginal person, like the value increases, right? So there, like the price to add the next person, that value converges on zero. And so in network effects, think like social networks like LinkedIn, Facebook, like physical networks, you have great defensibility, great economies of scale, and you have these monopoly businesses. With data, it's always been the opposite. Perverse economies of scale, the leaders slow down. There is no such thing as a data moat. That's non-contractual. Of course, there's contractual data moats, which is I have the data that you don't have, and you'll never be able to get it. But one thing that people misunderstand about data, and it's such an important point, I'm just going to take a moment to say it, is data sublimates into the ether, even if like you don't want it to. Like, let's just say you have these textbooks that only you have the copyright to, and nobody could ever read these textbooks but you. Only you have those. Well, okay, so people can read them, but they can't copy them. They can't do anything. They can just read them. It's in a library somewhere. So you can just check it out, but you can't copy it, you can't scan it. The reality is like people will read these books and they'll write blog posts, and that data is in their head somewhere, and that will be written down somewhere. And so the actual knowledge is finite, and it just kind of sublimates away from the sources. And so over time, there's a fixed set of knowledge that everybody ends up getting, and it all ends up becoming public. And so it's just not the right strategy for a company, in my opinion, to try and believe data is gonna save you from an economic moat. It'll save you in many ways, just not that way.
It's not the right mode. Yes, I totally, I'm with you. And we saw actually this levering out so many times, over and over and over again. The reason that Netflix is amazing is because they control the go-to-market, they control the access, they have the right.
They're a brand monopoly.
They're a
They're
brand.
They're a brand monopoly with a distribution monopoly. I mean, it's
Yes.
like,
Yes,
but also like people will use examples like Google. Like Google was an algorithmic advantage, and then there was a two-sided marketplace between people doing content and people doing advertisement. Now,
I start my courses actually with exactly that point. I say, like, guys, you came to me to learn about AI and data. Let me tell you, that's not what makes you rich. That's not the business model.
No.
And since we are going almost to the hour, and I could do this forever, I like let's talk about the super cycle. Like you mentioned it. You said it's a perfect storm, and we have seen perfect storms before, and they can lead to unexpected consequences. And I have a list here from a few folks. David Meyer, who is watching us, he says, "Well, what about ethical AI? How do we deal with life sciences?" Or Chrissa ask about what if we kind of use LLMs now on Wall Street? Will we not create an LLM bubble, an economic bubble? So what keeps you up at night? What do you think could go wrong? Could there?
Well, let's do the ethics one. This is a very important question. What's so strange is how the conversation has become so irrational. Like I remember the rise of the internet. Like we had like full on like net new marginal risks that were demonstrated very early that took down critical infrastructure. And like in a way, at that point in time, we weren't scared of our shadow. Like we were like, okay, let's identify the marginal risks, and then let's go ahead and adjust the policy infrastructure here. And what's different with AI is nobody's identifying the marginal risks. And in fact, if you ask many of like the experts, if you ask like Don Song, right, like Berkeley professor, MacArthur Genius Fellow, she'll be like, we don't, like AI safety research. She's a safety researcher. She's like, we don't know the marginal risks. And like, you don't have the same examples that we did in the internet age. And so I feel my big concern on a lot of the ethical stuff is somehow there's this anthropomorphic fallacy that people apply to AI. And we think, oh, it can do anything and all this terrible stuff. So let's go ahead and get ahead of it and put the stuff in place. But if you don't understand technically the marginal risks, you may end up putting the wrong policy for the wrong thing and making us less safe. And it's a very important point. I'm not saying, listen, I'm not like some libertarian, like, whatever accelerationist at all. Like I've worked in policy. I taught a Stanford course on policy. It's very important. But you have to know what you're policing. It's so important. Otherwise, you may have ineffective things and people get hurt, right? You don't want people to get hurt. And so I think ethics is super important. I think we've got great frameworks to think about it. I think these frameworks have evolved over every technical super cycle ever, and we should apply them here, but we should apply them sensibly, and we're not. And I think that's a huge issue.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I mean, one of the discussions which is very dear and near to my heart is you need to understand the technology. If you do not understand the technology, then you can't make money or business, but you cannot also not regulate. And we had this whole idea about AGI is coming, they will take over everything, like CEOs will be replaced, everybody will be replaced. And it's such I can't say the word, we're on a live channel here, but like it's such BS, right? It's kind of like this is a smokescreen which leads us in the wrong direction. And
Yep.
I love it the way you describe it. We should look into fundamentals. We should look in how to go
Marginal
to
risk.
market.
Understand the marginal risk, which is like we have an existing policy framework that we've put in place, and the discourse has been around for 20 years, and we've evolved it during that time. And you want to make sure that that discourse, which is hard won, is applied to this technology. And then if there's a shift, you have to understand what that shift is, and you have to, evolve your policy framework to that. Unfortunately, that's just not what's happening. I think it's like goes back to the Promethean legend. I just think we're scared of things that sound smart. I don't know.
Actually, that sounds human. I think
that sounds human. That's right.
The thing which scared most people is that thing suddenly. I always joke like ChatGPT is like your loved partner at a consulting firm. Sounds super smart, doesn't know a lot, right? So the whole
we got a weakness as humans. We have a weakness for this stuff. I mean, it's like it goes back to Prometheus. I just feel like we're kind of scared of these things, and instead we should be incredibly rational and do the right thing.
Yes. I think this was an amazing discussion. We had actually some listener actually wrote even a nice comment. Is that like this was one of the most informative conversations I have heard since the 1960s. Well, you should come often to this channel.
That's lovely. I appreciate that. It's very
so thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for all the questions. And Martin, big thanks to you. This was
of course,
an exciting talk.
No, absolutely pleasure. Okay, thanks everybody.